Good evening, everyone. Good to see all of you here this evening. As some of you may know, maybe you don't know, but today I turned 57 for the 10th time. And I've appreciated some of the sentiments that I've received on Facebook, and as well as those that were shared with me in person. Today, Lori made my favorite meal for my birthday and had all my family over, and so that was always such a wonderful time together with them. They gave me one of my favorite presents, which is bullets. So I used to tell them, I said, Dad, what do we give you? We don't know what to give you. You've lived way too long, and we can't think of what to give you next. And so I used to tell them, well, listen, for spring and summer, buy golf balls. And for fall and winter, massages. But the massages have been reduced to bullets now, so anyway. And you think, well, that's not much of a gift. Have you bought bullets lately? Ammo is extremely expensive. And then Jared topped it off by coming up and saying happy birthday, and he gave me a gift. And he gave me a book, and it's called The Craft of Sermon Construction. Real nice, huh? So, I love the family of God here at Linder Road. I'm really serious about that. The support that you are to one another, to me, but to so many people that extends beyond even our family here is absolutely tremendous. And so I just love and appreciate you. And I know the elders feel the same way. I know that both Clint and Jared feel the same way, but what a great support group you are, and how incredible it is that you share your love in such bountiful ways. We are so very thankful for that. Some of you may recall when you're growing up, or maybe you've even experienced it of late, generally this happens somewhere around the spring and summer, but you decide that you're going to lay a cement patio out back, or maybe you're going to reconstruct a sidewalk out front, or somewhere someone is putting down some kind of concrete, and it's fresh concrete, and it's malleable concrete, and as a result of that, you can go and you can take and put your handprints in it, or your footprints, and you've probably seen someone where little children have come along and they put these little tiny handprints in there, or they put little tiny footprints in there, and they usually put their initials, or maybe they might even put their names. And those impressions are there forever, or at least for the time that slab of concrete is there. But it's there forever, and that impression is there as well. Well, similarly, there was a place in the memories of the disciples where Jesus made a permanent impression on their lives, a place where he put his hands, his feet, his words into the wet sands of their hearts. And it so transformed their lives that they would never be the same. They would be forever changed. That impression was that deep and that strong, it would mold their lives. The incident that I'm talking about happened on the dampened sands on the shores of Lake Gennesaret. It's where Peter and James and John, who were fishermen, had spent the whole night fishing without any catch, and they're now on the shores, and they are working on their nets. Some of you might not be familiar with the Lake of Gennesaret. Gennesaret is a famous body of water in Israel. It's about 13 miles long. It's 8 miles wide. It dips all the way to the Earth's surface of 680 feet below sea level. It's also named the Sea of Galilee. It's also called the Sea of Tiberias. In Jesus' day, there were, I think there were like 9 populous cities or towns that went around the shores of the lake. And I say they're populous. Today, if you were to go there, you wouldn't see that many people around that lake. Well, Tiberias is a pretty good sized city itself, but in terms of just there have been a lot of small towns and fishing villages around Galilee, the Sea of Galilee, you wouldn't see that like it was in Jesus' day. In Jesus' day, there was like 9 of them, and all of them had over 15,000 plus people that lived in those cities. So for weeks, the Galilean countryside was humming with the news of this new prophet who has come on the scene that they knew of by name as Jesus of Nazareth. And he'd come down to Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee, which really is a fishing village, and he has been preaching in their synagogue. And he has been impressing them with his words, and his words are astounding them. They are amazed at his authority. We're over in Luke, the fourth chapter, beginning in verse 31. It says, "And Jesus came down to Capernaum, a city of Galilee, and he was teaching them on the Sabbath days. And they were continually amazed at his teaching, for his message was with authority." But it wasn't just that his message was one with authority and that he was powerful with his message, but there was another power that as you continue reading in that narrative, is there is a man who had a demon and Jesus, or demons and Jesus, cast them out. He calls them out from himself, and the people are even more amazed because not only does he preach with authority, not only does his message have authority, but there was a power because of this exorcism that takes place. And so in verses 36 and 37 it says, "And an amazement came upon them all, and they began discussing with one another and saying, 'What is this message? For with authority and power he commands the unclean spirits, and they come out.' And the report about him was getting out into every locality surrounding the district." And as a result of that, the next morning it says that the people are buzzing like a beehive. And when Jesus comes out in the morning, they're ready for them, and they're wanting to hear what he has to say. Beginning in chapter 5 and verses 1 through 3, "It came about that while the multitudes were pressing around him, listening to the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret." By the way, you might be wondering, why did he call it Gennesaret? Well, it's called Gennesaret because on the west side of the Sea of Galilee is a fertile plain called the Gennesaret. So it's a very fertile plain that is there. It's a beautiful part of the lake. It's green, it's lush, and that's where they were, okay? "And he saw two boats lying at the edge of the lake, but the fishermen had gotten out of them and were washing their nets. And he got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and he asked him to put out a little ways from the land, and he sat down and began teaching the multitudes from the boat." Doubtless, these fishermen were familiar, or at least were aware of Jesus. Remember, it says that he had been teaching on the Sabbath in their synagogues. So Simon and James and John, who were the sons of Zebedee, who were fishermen by trade, they were no doubt familiar with Jesus, and they knew of his popularity and that he was this up-and-coming prophet, and they know of his authority in his messages, and they know of the fact that he has exorcised these demons from this man. They know of these things here, and so he didn't have to be, they didn't have to be persuaded. They were already in awe of him, of his persuasive preaching, but also of his power and his presence. And so you can almost imagine them around the lake, and they're working on their nets. And if you've ever been to a fishing village, you know how they work on the nets. They're hunched over their necks, and they're fixing little tears that are there, and they're picking out the debris, and they're cleaning them up because they're going to use them the next day. Well, Jesus is going to come up to them, and he's going to have some penetrating words to say to them. And so he asks Simon, he says, "Go out a little ways from the shore." And they don't argue with him. They just row out a little ways from the shore. Well, why does Jesus want to get out on the water? Well, the people are pressing about him. And if you've ever been up to Camp Ivydale and have been in the Bible Bowl and tried to preach there, then Clint and Jared, as well as myself, can tell you that you have to really push your voice because you're preaching into the side of a mountain with a bunch of trees around them and a bunch of teenagers that absorb this thing here. So Jesus pushes out a little bit into the water, and now you know how your voice is amplified over the surface of the water. And if you've ever done much fishing, then a guy can be 300 yards away, and they can be talking, and you can hear them banging around in their boats and doing different things. You can sometimes even hear some of their discussions, even though they're a long ways away, because of that amplification. And so Jesus asked Simon to go out a little ways, but it's not just going to be Simon that's going to go out a little ways. We're going to find out that James and John probably end up in that same kind of a boat. And so Jesus has a captive audience, literally speaking. They didn't know that, But they're in for they're going to become a captive audience, and they're going to be in for one of the greatest objective lessons of their lives that is really going to speak to them. In verse 4 it says, "And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, 'Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch.'" In this recording of Luke, he doesn't tell you what Jesus was saying. He doesn't record for us the message that Jesus is proclaiming from the boat, because that's not its purpose. That's not what he's trying to get across. What he's going to try to get across is this impact that Jesus is going to have on Peter and James and John. And as he asked him to go out deeper into the water, they're going to find themselves going out deeper into their faith. And isn't that like Jesus when you think about it? That Jesus sometimes takes us out into deep water, out of the shallowness of life into the deepness of life, to deeper water where he's really going to challenge our faith. And our faith can either get a lot stronger and a lot deeper, or it can become more shallow. Jesus just does that sometimes. He pushes us into this deep water. It might be a new job, or it might be a new relationship, or it might be a new position that you're being put into. Maybe it's a new mission. Maybe it's a new purpose. Maybe it's a new project. There's something that pushes you into a deeper place. Maybe it's going to be your health. Maybe it's the economy. I don't know, but there's a lot of things where Jesus pushes us out into deeper water, and that deeper water experience sometimes has this potential of changing the way we come out of that experience. So Jesus said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Now, Peter, that's what he did as a profession. He knows all about fishing. He knows where the hot spots are, the fishing spots are. He knows the depth of the water of the Sea of Galilee. He's fished a lot of it, a good part of his life. That's his business. And so he's probably thinking of Jesus, well, who is this guy that would ask me to go out into the water and cast my nets? Maybe he's a little bit over his head in this, because after all, he's a preacher. And preachers don't know about those kinds of things. And so Simon answered and says to him in verse 5, he says, "Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing. But at your bidding, we'll let down the nets." And so Peter, like I said, knows the best fishing spots. He knows the most favorable conditions for making a catch. But out of respect for the master, he does what Jesus asked him to do. And little does he know that the sea is Christ's domain, and that the fish are under his domain. Verse 6 and 7. "And when they had done this, they enclosed a great quantity of fish, and their nets began to break, and they signaled to their partners in the other boat for them to come and help them, and they came and filled both of the boats, so that they began to sink." And so all of a sudden, Peter suddenly realizes that he who stood with him and asked him to let down his net was more than just a man. Because God's men don't do those things. Only did he is able to do such a thing as this. And so this Jesus was not simply a preacher that preaches with authority or power to heal. He's the Lord of the sea. He's the Lord of the fish. He's the Lord of every realm of the entire universe. And Peter, like those before him, like Abraham or like Job, are probably the one that you're the most familiar with Isaiah when he found himself in the presence of God. Remember Isaiah's word over in Isaiah 6? He says that I am ruined because I'm a person of unclean lips, and I dwell among a people of unclean lips. He knows he's in the place of someone incredible, and that's Peter's response, verses 8 through 10a that I called it. "But when Simon Peter saw that, he fell down at Jesus' feet, saying, 'Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord.' For amazement had seized him and all his companions because of the catch of fish which they had taken. And so also James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. See, launching out into the deep water had truly deepened Peter's faith in Jesus. He was more than a prophet, more than a preacher, more than a healer. He saw him as someone incredible. And so as the boats begin to fill with fish, the fishermen's hearts are filled to almost being speechless, and now they're primed for why Jesus has taken them out there, because that's the object lesson. And the object lesson was not to make them better fishermen or to be impressed with the fish. The whole object of what was going on here is that Jesus is wanting to mold these guys and change who they are from this deep water experience. And so Jesus said to him in verse 10b, "Do not fear, from now on you will be catching men." I think some of your translations say, "Fear not, from now on you'll be fishers of men." Now, a word that's used there for catch alive, zogreo, is a word that means just that very thing. You'll become fishers of men. You'll be catching them alive. That is incredible. So Jesus wasn't giving these rough seasoned fishermen lessons in fishing, but he's wanting to change who they are. Verse 11, "And when they had brought their boats to the land, they left everything and followed him." I want you to think about that for a second. They left everything and followed him. They left the greatest catch of their life. They left their boats. They left their nets. They left their livelihoods. They left their homes. They left their families. Some say that Peter's wife followed along, but they left their families. Everything, without even looking over their shoulder in a glance. They left everything and were willing to follow Jesus, and they became his closest disciples, and would be later, out of all the disciples, would be appointed as apostles. A great change had taken place there, and so the lesson, I think, revolves around several things, but the lessons for us this evening, I think, can be several. The first one that I can think about when I think about lessons to be learned from this fishing experience, this deep water experience, is that Jesus chooses not to minister to others alone. Jesus came here to be the Savior of the world, but his mission was a huge mission, and he knew his mission could only go so long as he lived. But in order for his mission to have legs, he had to bring others and make them a part of it. And so he brings Simon and James and John into this. And through them, down through the ages, he brings us into it. He makes us a part of this incredible work, because Jesus deliberately involves others in his work. If it was about fish, he could have rowed his own boat. If it was about fish, he could have done his own fishing, casting in his own nets. But that's not what he is about. Jesus is obviously the Savior of the world, but he's going to live for 33 years, 3 years past this incident, and he's going to die on a cross. And that's why when you look at Acts, the first chapter and verse 8, and he says to the disciples, to the apostles in particular, he says, "You'll be my witnesses in Judea, or in Jerusalem, in Judea, Samaria, and the remotest parts of the world." But even the apostles knew that they couldn't do it on their own, that they would become the pillars of the church. And that church would begin, and as we've talked about in these kingdom parables, how the church began to grow rapidly, and how when these people were persecuted in Jerusalem and they began to run for their lives, they didn't run and hide, they ran and preached. They ran and spread the good news. They had had a deep water experience with Jesus that changed their faith, and now they have been brought into the process. And that's what Jesus does with us. Jesus is not looking for a boatload of spectators. He's not waiting for people to sit on the side or on the shorelines and get tans. That's not what he's about. He's about us becoming fishers of people. And so a person can say, well, that was the apostle where he says, "I'll make you fishers of men." But then you have the great commissions of Mark, the 16th chapter, verses 15 and 16, Matthew, the 28th chapter, verses 19 and 20, Luke, the 24th chapter, and verse 44. And if you want to get into John, the 17th chapter, you can find even there where we're supposed to be going, because I didn't take them out of the world, I've sent them back into the world. And so we have this mission that has been given to us. And so when Jesus said to them, "You'll be catching men," well, we have to look at ourselves maybe in that same light and ask ourselves, what deep water thing have we gone through as Christians that would push us, that would motivate us to move beyond being mediocre in our Christian witness to becoming those who are more active in it and sharing our faith around us? Secondly, Jesus uses the familiar to do the incredible. And so what does he use here to make this impression on Peter, James, and John? Well, he uses a boat, and he uses nets, and he uses fish, all the routine things that were normal for those guys' lives. But he takes that which is normal, and he turns it into something that is incredible. And so what has God done in our lives? Where he's just taken something that seems to be pretty normal, pretty routine, and all of a sudden it becomes more than that. Where we've been taken into deeper water, and our faith has grown because of those things. Maybe it's a job loss. Maybe it is a new job. Maybe it is a relationship that's gone south. Or maybe it's a new relationship. Or, you use your imagination to think about how has God taken routine things to do an incredible work within you. Number 3, Jesus moves from safety of the seen to make us trust through the risks of the unseen. Jesus takes them past the shallows into deeper water, and he tells them to cast their nets. Same thing for us. We have taken out of the shallowness of our life, and maybe we have moved into some deeper water, and we're asked to cast our nets. We're asked to take a risk. We're asked to take a chance and to see if God is able to do something incredible in our lives. Number 4, Jesus proves the potential by breaking our nets and filling our boats. What is it that God has done in your life that has been exceedingly and abundantly, it's gone beyond anything that you possibly could have imagined to where you are now? I'm talking about just common, ordinary folks like you and like me, but God has moved so greatly in our lives that it's changed the way we look at things, and it's caused us to make decisions that normally we would not have made, but now we have done it, and we've risked. And then we see this great catch that comes into our lives that is so amazing. Number 5, Jesus conceals his surprises until we follow his leading. Jesus tells them, they're in these regular boats. They fish in those boats every day. He says, we need to leave the shallow. Let's go out into the deep water and cast your nets. Okay, like I said, Peter, he's a professional at that. And so he knows where the good fishing spots are or where the best spots are. He knows the great timing and so forth. But Jesus asks him to go out there. The water didn't glow. There wasn't a halo around the boat. The oars were just as heavy as always. The nets was just as heavy as always. But when he did what the master asked him to do, then this huge catch was given to him, and something remarkable was revealed to Peter that was so strong, and James and John so strong, so impactful, so impressive that they left everything behind. Everything behind, and followed after Jesus. And so the surprise didn't come until they put out into the deep. And I would say to you that that's how it's got to be with us too. Is you don't know how big God is until you put yourself into deep water. When you have to put your trust completely in him to work in your life. And then finally, Jesus reveals his objective to those who are willing to relinquish their security and trust. Think about what was said there. I want to use your boat. Let's move a little bit off the shore. He preaches a lesson. Peter, I want you to go out into the deeper water and cast your net. And so they did, and they got this huge boatload of fish. It says it's almost sinking them. And then the next thing you hear Jesus say to them is, from now on, you're going to be fishers of men. I don't know about you. That would have scared me. Okay, it would have scared me if I got this big bunch of fish all of a sudden, too. They were fishermen, but it still was amazing, and it caused them to fall down and to worship him. And so sometimes we have to go out into the deep as individuals. Sometimes we have to go out into the deep as a congregation and trust. It's comfortable to sit on the shores and dangle our feet in the water, right? It's another thing to go out into the water where it's way over your head, and you have to do some trusting. So when I think of this, I think about this whole idea of deep water and overflowing nets and sharing your faith. It leaves us feeling maybe just a little bit overwhelmed. And maybe it makes us feel even a little bit scared. It does me. And there are other times when these guys, you think, well, after they saw that, those guys will never be frightened of anything. Oh. Came about on one of those days that he and his disciples got into a boat, and he said to them, let us go over to the other side of the lake. And they launched out. But as they were sailing along, he fell asleep, and a fierce gale of wind descended upon the lake, and they began to be swamped and to be in danger. And they came to him and woke him up, saying, Master, Master, we're perishing. Everything feels out of control. We're going to die. Have you ever felt as though you're in a circumstance where you feel like you're going to die? I'm not talking physically. I mean, you feel it in your heart. I'm kind of thinking about, I guess, the Oldham family now and the Crane family, and they lose a loved one, someone who's dear to them, and their hearts are broken, and they're probably wondering if they're ever going to come back up for air again. They're probably feeling, are we going to die from this? Because it probably feels like that. I've never lost a wife. I've lost parents, both sides, lost brother, lost a sister, and lost great friends. But I'm thinking about Jenny and how hard that's got to be to lose a husband. You know, even though he had Alzheimer's, still he lost her husband, her soulmate. And same thing with Mandy. I mean, you got to feel like that. But man, this is really deep water, and the gale is really blowing, and I'm wondering if I'm going to make it through all of this. Pay attention to what Jesus' response to their fear is. And being aroused, he rebuked the wind and the surging waves, and they stopped, and it became calm. And he said to them, where's your faith? And they were fearful and amazed, saying to one another, who then is this that he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him? Who then is this? Church, who then is this? He's your Savior. He's your Savior. And he loves you more than you could ever begin to fathom how much he loves you. I know you've heard me say this numerous times. Was it nails that held Jesus to the cross? It was his love for you. In all your sin, his love for you. He saw you drowning, and he saved you. And so as you think about this sermon, and as you think about deeper water and deeper faith, don't let going out into deeper water scare you. Go on out there with him and trust him and watch him do something absolutely amazing in your life. It may not happen with days, maybe weeks, maybe months, but it'll happen. Well, you'll look back and you'll say, what an incredible Savior we truly do have. So the message is yours. If you need to respond for anything, ask prayers, or just want to share, then now would be the time to do that. What together we stand and sing and give you opportunity.